And welcome to our webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping features. Just remember to hit mute and mute your microphone if you're not speaking. And if you're experiencing any technical difficulties or delays with the screen or the audio, turn off your webcam to save some bandwidth. We'll have the chat bar open, so go ahead, click on that and post questions there and we'll try to answer them. And if you're having technical difficulties, we are not locking this session, so please feel free to leave the session and then rejoin and we'll readmit you. So welcome to our session, our first of 4 webinars on 4C ways to engage students online. We're actually combining 2 of the C's. There's actually 5, but we are combining these 2. The first 2 are about connecting and communicating. And you can see that the bit.ly link on the right-hand side is a shortcut to the slide deck. And we'll have a few other links to share throughout the webinar today. And we will put those in the chat bar as well, so you can click on them easily. Your hosts for today, I'll introduce myself. My name is Jason Psycho. I am an instructional technology consultant here at Wayne Risa, and my co-host today is Judy Bowling. She's an instructional technology and library media consultant at Wayne Risa. And again, one of the things that we will kind of remind people about today is to just kind of make sure that you set norms for meetings, and we're doing that and modeling that today. So if you are meeting with a group of students or teachers or administrators, it's always good to have a screen on your slide on your slide deck that mirrors some of the things you want them to do. And so we're doing that here. This is just good protocol to set norms and expectations for any virtual meetings. So, and we plan to do that a lot today, is try to model best practices and model what we're talking about through. Moving forward, we'll give you a couple minutes here to put in the chat bar by clicking on the chat icon. What is something you said this year that would have made no sense in 2019? And just go ahead and type in the chat bar. We'll give you about 30 seconds to do so. And again, what we're doing here is we're kind of modeling a mechanism to kind of break the ice with any live sessions that you have with your students. Just start off with something that is not related to content and kind of informal, but again, you're just building rapport with your students. So go ahead. And we'll see results like you're on mute, or you're frozen, or terms like social distancing. Who would have said that last year, right? So moving on, we're going to start off with a quote and from Chris Caval here. And it's what we're going to cover today is not really about changing pedagogy. And you can read the quote there. It says, if pedagogy is the art of teaching, we're not changing the art, we're mixing mediums and exploring new artistic endeavors. And again, a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today are nothing new, nothing earth-shattering. However, what we're trying to stress here is the importance of these making sure that you're connecting with your students and you have open channels of communication, because in an online environment, we must emphasize those things, or else we're going to lose students, and we saw that a lot last year. So one of the things we want to highlight here is the fact that we're looking at another school year where we will at least have some remote learning in some way, shape, or form. And that just depends on the district. For many of you, you're all from a variety of districts, and your plans haven't been officially released. They will be shortly, but most of you will have some component of remote or virtual or online learning. And so what you see here is just the search history for the term remote learning. And you can see for the past year, again, probably wasn't in your vernacular in 2019, but come early March, you look at the Google search results, and clearly remote learning started trending from nothing to everything, beginning in early March and continuing on to the end of the school year. So let's kind of highlight a few things related to remote learning. And again, we're modeling some things such as humor. And so let's take a look at the one way to express our feelings about remote learning.
Hey, so as some of you guys might know, I'm a music teacher, and I found that one of the best ways that I can process the whole transition to online learning and teaching is to write a song. So I wrote a song. I'd like to share that with you guys now. Here we go.
How many of you felt that way over the last couple months? So let's go through the agenda for today, and we'll start, pretty much every session with some sort of agenda and overview of the content we're covering. So we're going to talk about engagement first. And again, the title of our webinar series is related to engaging online learners. And so engagement is one of those wishy-washy terms that we need to kind of clarify. And once we do that, we'll talk about ways to promote engagement through connecting and communicating with your students before school starts, and things you can do beforehand during the first few days of school to really set the tone for the school year, and then things you can do throughout the school year, ongoing types of connections and communications. And if there's any time left over, we will spend some time on Q&A. To begin, one of the things that we struggle with is this concept of engagement. And we really can't see engagement. We'll have links at the end, but if you notice there's a link at the bottom here, and it talks about how we really can't see engagement. There's no way to see engagement, or you can be easily fooled by what you think is engagement. Kids talking isn't necessarily engagement right off the bat. Kids working hard quietly isn't necessarily engagement. An atmosphere of fun isn't necessarily engagement, because we can't talk about engagement unless we define engagement. And so there's a lot of definitions, but they all contain some continuum of these three things: attention, commitment, and persistence. And so attention, are they paying attention or are they not paying attention? Commitment, are they committed to the task at hand or are they not committed to the task at hand? And then persistence, do they persist when content or the activities get difficult, or do they drop off? And so when we talk about engagement, we're talking about these three things and whether or not there's high or low levels of each of these. Again, you're not always going to have high engagement across the board every day, 6 hours a day, through 13 years of school. However, this is a goal to aim for, is keeping their attention, keeping a high sense of commitment, and creating an atmosphere where students will persist when the content gets difficult or the activities get difficult. So we can't see engagement in a physical classroom easily. And so an online classroom, or in a situation of remote learning where we're not physically present with the students, is also very difficult to perceive, and even more so than in a physical classroom. So what are some of the things we can do to support that? One of the leading frameworks for online engagement is something called the academic community of engagement. And so it's three kind of nodes, if you will, and how do we support cognitive engagement, how do we support behavioral engagement, and how do we support affective engagement. And so how we do that, if you look at the triangle, that center part, the black part, is basically what we would call independent engagement, what the student is willing to do without any supports, or how engaged the student can be without any additional support. And so where we can provide those supports is through the course community in the classroom, and through personal community and connections that way. And again, as that triangle kind of reaches out, and we get additional course community and personal community support through cognitive, behavioral, and affective supports, we have the engagement necessary for academic success. And at the end, we'll include links to the articles, the research articles that support this. So that's all fine and dandy, but what do we do as examples of supports here? And so this kind of segues into what we're talking about today. I have here from that same article some ideas or examples of support through the behavioral, cognitive, and affective range. What I want to point out here is that for today's purpose, a lot of these deal with communication. So from behavioral examples, you see like the first one there, that's not what we're talking about today. Today's not about Chromebooks and technology and access and hotspots. What it is about is some of the rest of these, monitoring student activity and emailing and checking on students when activity was low, creating a form for identifying concerns, having some sort of chain or protocol in place for counselors and parapros to contact families to assess needs. Even something as simple as providing access and navigation assistance in an online setting, something they haven't done before. From the cognitive standpoint, focusing on essential standards, providing feedback, again, there's that communication piece again. And from the affective, again, just reaching out and putting in a bit of a personal touch on connections with the students. So a lot of these supports deal with communication. And again, we're not talking about anything earth-shattering here. There's nothing really super related to pedagogy here. It's just creating that element of connection with your students to increase that engagement in an online setting. Now would be a good time to kind of talk a little bit about engagement across the distance learning spectrum. And over this webinar and the next couple webinars, we're going to be talking using these terms. There's a lot of terms associated with online learning, distance learning, virtual learning, remote learning, emergency remote learning. And those all have different meanings in different contexts, whether we're talking about teaching and learning, whether we're talking about pupil accounting. But for the sake of this webinar, in the series of webinars, what we're going to be referring to is these three major types of environments, and we'll refer to them as a synchronous environment. And a synchronous environment is where lessons or interactions are occurring live in real time just over the internet. So right now, this is a synchronous meeting. We're talking to people. You're listening, you're live, you're not listening, unless you're listening to the recording of this, of course, but we're teaching and discussing in real time. Asynchronous, the best way to describe this is if you've ever taken an online course. You have reading materials to go through. You might have to watch some lectures, listen to some podcasts, but students do that and learners do that on their own time, and they work when convenient for them. So an example of this would be, let's say, a discussion board where people are interacting and there's points for engagement, but it's not in real time. So you participating in a discussion is a way to reach out and connect with your students. It's just not happening in the moment all together at once like it would in a live classroom. And a hybrid environment is basically a blend. Again, we don't know what districts are doing yet. Many of you don't know yet, but you're seeing these models of everything's online this fall, or we have some sort of hybrid model where students are in class a couple days a week and at home a couple days. And so we really need to focus on how do we make those connections and keep those lines of communication open through all three of these environments. And to summarize all that, what we're really looking at is what we call an active online presence. And so even though you're not in a classroom with the students, they have the feeling that you're there. That's the major goal here with communication and connection in an online environment. And how do you do that? How do you create that active online presence? And the tips we're going to give you today, we're focusing on these 5 things. We're focusing on being clear and consistent, making sure that you're very explicit in what you're talking about. You're proactive. You're reaching out as soon as you see a problem, or if you even sense there's a problem, not after the problem has occurred. You're being authentic. You're putting you're not sharing every single life detail, but it's pretty clear that you have a passion for your material and you're passionate about student learning, and you're flexible. We know that the last few months have been crazy. We know that the end of the school year last year required you to be flexible, and that's a two-way street. We want you to be flexible with your students, and we want them to have that flexibility as well and be comfortable with having that flexibility. And again, this is a time to try new things, and along with flexibility, be understanding that sometimes things go flat or things don't work, but it allows us to have that freedom to be creative and innovative, knowing that some things will work and be awesome, some things will work and be okay, and some things just won't work. And so some of the things that we can do before the class even starts, the front end work that you want to do in August before the first day of school, is to build some norms and some expectations about how to connect and contact and communicate with your students, how they communicate with each other, how they communicate with you, how you communicate with them, and even how parent and teacher communication should be set up. And some of it is kind of setting boundaries in a way, but we'll talk more about that in a second. But again, you're looking at all these different pathways for people to connect with one another. A couple things to consider. how will that communication take place? Are you planning on, is your district going to have some sort of video conference setup or tool like Google Meet or Zoom or WebEx or any of those? Email is an obvious choice because we've been using that even before the remote learning took place. Phone, again, many teachers and would not want to give away their personal phone number, but maybe there's some other alternative. For example, having a Google Voice number. Or if we are in a situation where the students aren't necessarily in class, but the teachers are physically in the building, making that connection through your classroom phone as opposed to your own personal cell phone. Set some boundaries on both availability and when you can be reached and when you can't be reached, as well as turnaround time expectations, both for you as a teacher responding to a student or parent question, and vice versa. If you reach out to a student, what's the common expectation for turnaround time? How often should they be checking their communication channels? And things like weekday, weekend, off hours, and so on and so forth. So here's some sample text. Again, you have the slide deck. You can copy and paste this and is used as you see fit or adjust. But you can see here, you point out some very clear guidelines about expectations for when, where, how to meet, and what are the expectations for turnaround time. Notice there it says the same thing for parents as well. Talk to your district about that and maybe set some standards for a grade level, a building, a level elementary, secondary, and content area. So the more consistency you have, the less problems you have in terms of one teacher does this, but another teacher does something else, and there's some friction there. The next piece here is related to building your virtual classroom. Now, again, we don't have the time to talk about every single platform or learning management system, but what we can talk about is creating a customized or personalized environment that's inviting. Again, I was a teacher who was not necessarily the most creative when it came to decorating my walls or putting up posters or anything like that. What I did do was add some personal touches I saw fit, and that kind of became part of my personality anyway. But in an online environment, you have some options depending on your learning management system to make it pretty, add some flair to the background, just make it inviting. You want to create a welcoming space for your class, for your virtual classroom. Along those same lines, what you want to do is create a navigation tutorial, and in the link there you can see a screencast showing how you can show students how to navigate the classroom at the beginning of the school year. And so there's less questions or fewer questions about, how do I access this, or how do I get to this part? And that would be good for the parents to see as well. Opening this up, I want to point out a few things. It's a minute. So. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mr. Psycho's biology class. To begin, go to classroom.google.com and enter the following code that you see right there. I'll send that to you in an email. Let's take a little quick tour of the classroom in about 60 seconds. The first tab here is the stream, and this is where I'll be posting announcements. Second is classwork, and you can see all of the work for this course broken down by units. So one thing you should notice there is the teacher is going through and just basically doing a how-to guide on how to access the content in the course. The other thing to notice is that, and this is important, that the students see your face and hear your voice. And I can't stress that enough, how important that is when there's a lack of interaction in a physical environment. Students still want to hear your voice. Students still want to see your face. It's the difference between sharing a lecture about a topic and sharing a YouTube video on the same topic. It could have the exact same content, but it's personalized because it's your voice. For the administrators in the audience today, one of the things you might want to consider is working with staff and working with other administrators in the district to create consistency. So this could be consistency in which learning management system you use, consistency in the layout, and standardizing some templates here and there. One thing that's difficult for students, particularly in the middle and high school, if they have 6 different teachers and each teacher sets their classroom up just slightly differently, that creates a problem because there's this additional barrier or load on their brain to kind of figure out, okay, I'm in this class, this is how I'm supposed to function, here's where the assignments are for this class, but in second hour it's different. Try to create some consistency across grade levels, across content areas, across buildings, so that there's fewer barriers to learning for the students. An example here I have at the bottom is a setup here that I'm working with a district on with respect to creating a standard template in Moodle. So every teacher will have this at the top of their Moodle course. It talks about getting started, some things I've talked about already, some additional things with digital citizenship, the course introduction, a place for announcements, a place for general questions, and so on and so forth. So every student in every class in that school will see these things at the top, and so they know how to access core materials for the course. And so again, consistency and standardization is different than personalizing. Personalizing is the border, the pictures, the nice things around it, whereas consistency deals with the structure and the content of the course.
So we are going to shift gears and provide some examples and some ideas and some activities on how this communication and connection with your students might look like. I do want to mention that all of these resources are going to be linked onto a document at the very end. So you will, some of them are embedded in the presentation, but all of those plus a few extras are on a resource document at the very end that you'll get as well. So I just want to mention that for those of you that are clicking along with that. So we know that when our kids spend their daytime hours in safe, supportive schools, where our adults are working every day to build those strong relationships with every student, that those students are simply better and more engaged as learners. As our students return to school this fall, they are looking to pick up where they left off, but we all know that it's going to look very different. They're also bringing with them many stories and experiences. And so when we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs alongside the whole child model, we can see that without a sense of safety and belonging, we cannot expect our students to be ready for rigorous learning. So we're concerned about those learning gaps for sure, and those essential standards for sure, but we first have to address those social, emotional learning needs, because a lot of our students might feel disconnected, so they're going to need to hear us say things like, it's going to be all right, we're here to help you. All of the things that all of you do so well each and every day, and just to let our kids know that we are in this together. There's a link at the end there that's from Dr. Pam Cantor, who's the founder of Turnaround for Children. And if you've not listened to this particular podcast, she shares her thoughts on the impact that the school closures had on our students that you might find helpful. And a quote that I read recently that kind of touched my heart was by a professor who kind of said, as we're looking forward to bringing our kids back in the fall, whatever that looks like, that we really need to be focused on how are we going to hold our students' hearts? Because we know that at the end of the day, it's all about relationships. And so in March, when all of our schools shifted online, relationships with our kids had already been established. And we simply needed to continue to nurture those relationships and maintain them online. In a traditional settings, there's standard practices that teachers use to build that strong class culture, but a lot of these practices don't necessarily transfer perfectly to online learning. But just like in a traditional setting, a strong class culture does not happen by itself. It requires planning on trust, respect, and responsibility with everyone that's in that classroom. So in this audience, I know that we have a variety of people that know right now that maybe your students are going to be starting fully online, maybe fully face-to-face, and some of you might be in that corner of uncertainty right now. So again, the following slides that we've built just have some suggested activities, some ideas, some strategies to help you connect and communicate with your students, to help build that sense of belonging and engagement in their online learning environment. So creating that community in your classroom, as we know, is one of the most important things, important parts of feeling like you belong. And it's not just about fitting in. It's a place where people accept you for who you are and your opinions. A common concern that we hear with online learning is that feeling of being disconnected. Our students are spending a lot of time on their computers, and we don't want them to feel like they're just engaging with the computer, but with each other, with one another, and with you, the teacher, as well as with the content. So we want to make sure that we're establishing some routines. Jason alluded to that, a few moments ago, and some shared class agreements or norms. So similarly, the things that you would do in your traditional classroom, because we know that all of those help foster connections and form relationships from that very first day. So just some ideas like a morning message. So many of you in traditional classroom have that morning message displayed on your whiteboard when students walk into your classroom. So consider creating a daily message in your virtual classroom. You might choose to ask a question, post a question as a means of taking attendance every day, or just having a discussion. You might, depending on your grade level, you might establish themes for each day, like Math Mondays or Figured Out Fridays. You might, Jason alluded to the virtual classroom within your LMS, but many of you have probably seen those Bitmoji virtual classrooms. So it's just fun, but that might be a way to kind of connect with your students to build that virtual classroom. Perhaps an interactive week at a glance, something with personality, something to bring that feeling of safety and comfort to your students. So again, trying to build those connections with your kids. You want to ignite some conversations by building in some mindfulness activities, like the rose, thorn, bud activity, which can be used to have kids reflect on something positive, something that is perhaps challenging to them, and then some new ideas or things that they might be looking forward to or experiencing. If you have students in your class, because we know that technology could be a barrier for some students, so in the event that you have students that perhaps don't have internet connectivity, you want to make sure that you are perhaps reaching out to them with a phone or finding other ways to help them be a part of that class community and that sense of belonging as well. So a part of that, again, many of you are quite familiar with the importance of setting the tone for the day by standing outside your door and greeting your kids. And traditionally, that might be a high five, that might be an elbow bump, it might be, just saying hello. You might have a different routine, but it's that time in your classroom that helps you get to know your kids, kind of get a pulse of where they're at for the day and build relationships. And so as you look at engaging your students online, you want to take a look at and consider, how are you going to have that greeting for your students at your virtual door? So if you're not already familiar with Flipgrid, just as an example, Flipgrid is a video discussion platform that allows you, the teacher, to post a topic and students can record short videos in response. So one of the things that you might consider is perhaps a welcome message using Flipgrid, and then your students can respond to that by introducing themselves. Not only that they can virtually meet one another, but it gives you the chance to hear the correct pronunciation of their names, because we know how powerful it is to call people, anybody, by their names, but certainly to use the correct pronunciation. And so, in the chat, if you've already got some ideas of how you might virtually greet your students at the door, please share those and build off of one another there. Icebreakers are another great way to get to know one another and to build community. Icebreakers can also be used to facilitate learning. They can also be used to engage in different content that you're teaching. So a couple of just some ideas that are linked in that final resource document that I alluded to, it might be that just different ways to have kids share information about themselves. So different variations of that about me activity. So it could be using a Freyer model, where you can pose different questions, some non-threatening questions, being, perhaps sensitive to the needs of everybody in their own current situation. It could be a Guess Who, where you're sharing some, facts of your interest or hobbies and getting your classmates to get to know one another that way by guessing who might have said that. And that might not be something that you engage in on the very first day, but in those first few days when your class is getting to know one another. And then some of us might know it by 2 truths and a lie. You can also refer to it as 2 truths and a fib. But again, just different creative ways to get kids to get to learn about one another, because unlike in the traditional classroom, they're not in that physical space day after day after day to kind of turn and talk and learn all those tidbits about one another. So we want to try to engage kids in some of those activities that we establish for them. So another idea would be to have a virtual locker. So similar to the virtual classroom, virtual locker is another way that you can have kids share, 5, 10 different things that depict their interests, well, that slide doesn't seem to want to share, but it is there. So 5 or 10 different things that perhaps they want to share about themselves. So they're visually representing some of those interests. Another thing that could be done is to, again, using Flipgrid, where we have alluded to kids introducing themselves, but Flipgrid has a feature in there that has a pixel filter, and again, a variation of the game Guess Who. Kids could disguise themselves and share different things about themselves, being sure not to give away who they are, and then other students can respond to the videos and guess to see who that classmate might be. So this one that is actually showing on your screen is called Learning Stations, and this was developed by a high school teacher as sort of a variation of some of those previous icebreakers that we mentioned, where, again, just a different way to get to know each other, but at the high school level, with classrooms being structured a little bit differently. This particular high school teacher is setting it up so that this particular learning station would take a week. And in her plan, she's planning to do it so that when she meets with each of her classes once a week, that they'll work on a couple of these stations collaboratively together in that synchronous environment. And then the other 3 stations will be done asynchronously. And so if you haven't already seen that online, so she has it set up so that there's different stations. It's in a Google slide deck. It is geared towards high school, but it can be adapted for any grade level. So just another way to kind of capture information about each of your students in an interactive way that addresses both the synchronous and asynchronous connections that our kids have. So again, a lot of different icebreakers that are out there, and these are just a sampling of some of them. So again, those are things that you want to consider those first few days of connecting and building community with your students. And so these next few ideas and activities and strategies are geared more towards things that you would do on an ongoing basis. So one of them is sort of a temperature check. And so we're going to do a poll here. So if you are looking at that screen of different animals, which one of those best describes you right now? We'll give you a few moments just to all right, so most of you right now are kind of feeling like you are the squirrel, kind of like, hold on, slow down. And so this is just one quick way. So again, depending on the video platform that you are using, Zoom has the built-in poll function, but there are a lot of other tools out there that are linked there on the right that you could use for doing kind of a quick poll survey to check in and see how your kids are doing. So it just gives you sort of that pulse of where they're at. These check-ins can be informal, like what we just did there with the meme, and they can be a little bit more structured. And so there are a lot of these structured ones linked in the resource document that you can make a copy of and use yourself. So one of them could just be a simple Google form to capture where your kids are at, both from like their emotions. Is there anything that they want to share with you? And capture it so that you can kind of engage with them at a different time. So there's just some different templates that are there that you can modify, but it might just give you some examples of what you might be able to do to get feedback from your student. And then this is just one that uses emojis. So you can take any one of these and make a copy of it yourself to check in with your students and see where they're at. It could also be that you are just making phone calls. And again, depending on your class, you might be able to manage that a little bit easier because I know secondary student teachers have a lot more kids than elementary. And so I would recommend that you make it more manageable by creating a schedule and rotating through perhaps some small groups of students every day, because that can be really powerful. And so Jason again alluded to hosting some office hours. And this is just a great time to connect with your students and families. Usually it's, via some kind of video platform to discuss assignments or questions outside of your formal instruction. And again, as Jason alluded to, your district may already have some guidelines established for you for those office hours, so be sure to familiarize yourself with those. And again, making yourself available can be more efficient than all of those one-to-one calls, because there's a lot of students, but we do know that they may need more help. But in this office hour situation, the burden is on the student to initiate the contact. So knowing that you might miss out on some students who are not being proactive, you want to make sure that you are establishing other ways of checking in with them to provide some support. And when we were talking to teachers who were engaged in office hours in the spring, what we learned from a lot of them is that sometimes some students just checked in just to have a conversation. And they just wanted to, see you, the teacher, face to face. And in some cases, if they were the only one or two students that showed up, many of the teachers, they might have played an online, game or activity or an icebreaker, just kind of letting the students kind of guide the direction that needed to go into. So it has some flexibility, but again, you want to establish some dedicated times for that. And so the power of video, as we know, is definitely there, because when it's not possible to be with your students in a synchronous session, you want to think about how you might still be present with them. And your students, as we know, they want to see your face. They want to hear your voice. So we are highly recommending that you use the power of video and audio to record yourself whenever possible, and to just get creative with how you're communicating with them. So some of you in the audience might recognize this lovely face here as Sarah Ahern. She is currently a first grade teacher in Ann Arbor schools, and she graciously shared with us a video of her welcoming her student. And I'm sharing it for two reasons. One is for just an example of what that might look like, but I'm also sharing it because of her bravery, because this was her very first one. And as clearly as I've had difficulties sharing the screen today, when you're using technology, you're gonna have problems and you're gonna have difficulties, and it does not have to be perfect. And I think oftentimes, when we can make those mistakes in front of our kids or fail forward in front of our kids, we're certainly modeling for them, that it is okay and that this is a safe place. And so I, am thankful to Sarah for allowing us to share hers. And again, this was her first attempt. And as she said, she did a summer school this summer, and, as with anything, the more you do it, the better you get. And so this is just real brief, but again, just an example of her
so
welcome.
Boys and girls, I'm going to get started. And if other people join us, we'll just keep going. If you don't know me yet, my name is Mrs. Ahern, and I teach at Carpenter Elementary, and I teach first grade there. So I'm really excited to have you. This is new this summer for me too. So I'm learning just like you guys are about Schoology and the different platforms we're going to use. What will happen is each morning we'll meet on Google Meet. And in our Google Meet, in a few minutes, I'm going to share some slides, okay? And in those slides, we'll do a morning meeting where we'll do a greeting and a share, and then we'll have our lesson. And at the end, I'll tell you about our badge. And your badge assignment is the work that you're going to do as part of.
So again, I share that because, as you can see, there's nothing fancy about it. It is authentic, and it's not perfect. And Sarah would be the very first person to say that. And I think that that's okay. And I think that it's really powerful because, again, at the end of the day, your kids want to see you. The video right below her is somebody who engaged with some green screen, and it's a little bit more fancy, but definitely brings in some humor and some authenticity to it. But it doesn't have to be like that. And so this is a little different.
Hi there, first and second graders. I hope you're doing well. I know things have been a little like a roller coaster ride with ups and downs lately. I'll be sending home some fun things to.
So again, it's linked in the slide there for you to see that. But again, just coming up with ways to make those connections with your students. So it can be very simple, just you in front of the webcam. It could be something like Jason alluded to with that screencast, having your face there as you're sharing your lessons or announcements. One of the powerful things that we heard from parents was that it was really helpful to create a video that would give a week overview. So if you're using some type of LMS, some learning management, to create a video that just kind of welcomes your students to that week and gives them an overview of, what are the activities, what are the lessons, what are the expectations for that week, and just kind of laying it out so that they're not just having the links or the documents, within that learning management system, but they've got that video of instruction and welcoming message to go along with it. And so a lot of feedback from parents that was really helpful and really powerful. And again, just being your authentic self is what, our kids want to see. If you're using something like Google Docs and you're accustomed to providing typed comments, if you're not familiar with the extension Mote, it's a Chrome extension. Mote is really powerful in that it allows you to give audio feedback in those comments for any of the Google apps. So again, just another opportunity for kids to hear your voice. So this one's just for a fun, but if you were going to create some type of a Bitmoji virtual classroom, there's a link there for directions on how you can put yourself in there, and it's really very simple. So again, just fun ways to put yourself in front of your kids as much as you can in ways that might be more serious and structured, but in some ways that might be just a little silly and fun as well. We know the power of newsletters, and so this isn't something new, but again, communication is the key here. And so there are different technology tools that you can use to do that. It could be as simple as just sending out an email. But again, the power of images and videos, if your classmates are doing things, if they're sharing them, just because things have moved into the online world doesn't mean that we want to stop sharing, the great things that are happening in your classroom. And so just being consistent with that and having a structure in place so that families and students know when and how that information is going to be shared out with them. Chats and discussions can be done both synchronously and asynchronously, and there's a variety of reasons why you might have that chat. One of them, again, might be that it might be your mechanism for taking roll call. So posing a question, perhaps in your LMS, and having kids respond to it and to one another and seeing who's engaged in that for the day. It's a great way to connect with your classrooms. Again, using Flipgrid is another way if you want to engage in some video discussions. That's a great and flexible tool that you can use for that. There are other apps that are out there to help engage in conversation as well too, beyond just Google. Nearpod and Pear Deck are things that we'll jump into a little bit more in some of the upcoming webinars, but those are another great way to ignite some of that conversation. And again, a discussion session might not ever start with an actual discussion. It might start with something that, you want to have that balance between starting with something that kids aren't too unfamiliar with so that they don't know where to start, but not something that they're so knowledgeable with that they can just bluff their way through. You want to have kind of that balance where you're igniting their thinking, possibly giving them some time ahead of time to do some research to engage in that discussion, but providing opportunities, whether it be face-to-face actual conversation or via technology and engaging in some small group conversation. Another way too that we'll just kind of practice right now is just what we call just the waterfall. So in your chat, we're accustomed to just putting things in there as we might think of them, or we've already asked you a couple times today to engage in the chat, but it might be something where you might pose a question to kids and you're saying like pause. You might formally turn off the chat or just say it. Okay, nobody's in the chat right now. And if I were to do that right now and say, okay, what is your favorite form of exercise? And then 1, 2, 3, go. Now everybody throw your answer into the chat. So it showed cascade sort of like a waterfall. And we've been in quarantine now for many, many months. So everybody needs to have some type of exercise. So lots of walking. I know my dog is had more walks than ever. Yoga, excellent. So again, just another strategy for capturing some thinking, especially if you're doing math or something like that. It just helps provide some structure for that. And then looking at some different small group interactions. When we think about pen pals, certainly we can do it virtually, but don't underestimate the handwritten pen pals as well too. So I know that we can't give out student addresses and things of that nature, but we might be able to do that virtually by taking some pictures of a handwritten note because of the time, and thoughtfulness. I know for me personally, a handwritten note just has a different feel to it than an email note. Establishing some phone pals, just like you might have a homework buddy or a buddy system in your traditional class, what might that look like virtually as a first line of help? Doing some virtual turning and talking, depending on the video conferencing platform that you're using, you may or may not have the ability to break kids into breakout rooms, but that's a really powerful way to engage kids in conversation and small group discussion, and then bringing them back. Establishing some small groups by just taking a Google Doc and sharing it out and assigning group numbers, and, you know, kind of framing that structure in, okay, if you're group 1, you're going to take slide 1, or you're going to take the designated area of the Google Doc number 1, and just giving them structure to have some online conversation and some interactions with some things that are in place. Otherwise, they'll be writing all over one another. Some of you saw and maybe even participated in some virtual theme weeks during spring break and beyond. So again, just trying to build that sense of community, build that school spirit, coming up with multiple ways to connect with your students. It doesn't necessarily have to be during spring break. You can have a spring break. It could be, you know, at any time of the year if you're just feeling a need to build that community within your own classroom and or your school. Because again, the power of images and videos. And I should mention with all of this, with the videos and the images, that you do want to make sure that you are being compliant with the acceptable use policies and any media authorization forms that you have in your schools, because we want to be sensitive to our students and keep them safe. And so just be mindful of that as you are incorporating, you know, images and videos into any of these ideas that we've shared with you. And then finally, just gratitude and appreciation. And we've intentionally, you know, left this as our last slide because number one, we appreciate all of you taking time out of your day to join us to, you know, gain some ideas and strategies on how you might connect with your students and communicate with them and families. So again, just be thinking about, you know, what are things that you're doing or have done in that traditional setting, and what might that look like in the online setting. And some of them might transfer seamlessly and some not so much. But we know that the simple act of just expressing gratitude is the quickest way to increase our sense of well-being. Thankfulness is certainly a part of gratitude, but it's also people's willingness just to show appreciation for kindness extended to them and to return that kindness in some way. We all love to be thanked because it lets us know that someone else has acknowledged our behaviors and actions, but people don't always know how much they're appreciated and valued by others, especially if nobody ever tells them. And so just at the very minimum, just starting any of your meetings, any of your engagements with your students on a positive note and with energy, being supportive throughout. I know right now we're just sharing a screen, but if we had, you know, the grid of all your smiley faces and incorporating some nonverbal encouragement, whether it be a thumbs up, a clap, you know, maybe we as a class establish sort of our own, you know, salute, if you will, some kind of hand gesture or friendly form of encouragement to one another. It might be that you establish some type of a routine or norm that maybe at the end of a meeting or a community meeting that you have kids, you know, share out an appreciation, an apology, an aha, some type of a shout out. So again, things that you have been doing in your traditional, but how might that look online? Having kids creating gratitude journals. And there's some links there to some different technology tools that you might consider to doing that. And then again, just sending notes of gratitude. I mean, I can speak for myself personally. You don't do things to get a note of gratitude, but the power of receiving one really is, it just touches your heart. And so we certainly can do it digitally again, but consider having kids writing a note in that hand, just in their own handwriting, because again, the time that it takes, there's something special about that handwritten note, and then taking a picture of it and sending it. So it might not be the exact same as receiving that original handwritten note, but seeing that somebody took that time to write that handwritten note can be powerful as well. And the notes of gratitude link that is linked there too, this was just an idea where you could collect, you know, a lot of gratitude, notes of gratitude from your classmates, but also being sensitive again that this might not be something that they want publicly shared. And so asking them, is this something that you want to keep private? Is it something you want to share with your classmates? And then if they've given permission to share it out publicly, perhaps creating some type of a slideshow that could be, maybe you highlight one note of gratitude a day, or maybe that's just part of your protocol to share out notes of gratitude at the end of one of your community meetings. So just a bunch of different ideas, but the power of sharing your gratitude and appreciation for others. And so we will be sharing the recording, this slide deck, the list of resources in this Google site. Right now, the only one that will be active will be the Connect and Communicate. We will populate it as the webinars proceed so that at the very end, you'll have a complete site of resources and activities. So whether you can do it right now or when you have time, we would love, I mean, we've shared a lot of ideas, but we would love to hear from you. So if you have any ideas that you have found to be effective and have had success, or perhaps it's something that you are considering doing in the fall, we've just built a collaborative slide deck that you can add your ideas, so we can just continue to learn and grow with one another. So if you just grab an empty slide, add your idea, perhaps a template that you're willing to share, and then we can, again, learn from one another and share those ideas. So with that, that was a lot, but again, everything is in the, I'm going to stop sharing. Everything is in the slide deck. So if there are any questions or concerns or thoughts, please feel free to, add them in a chat or unmute yourself. And we, again, just want to thank you for being a part of today and giving up an hour of your time. And we hope that there was at least one idea, one strategy that you maybe didn't know that you can implement in your classroom this fall. So with that, we'll kind of open it up to any questions you might have.
Before you do, and we'll kind of monitor the chat, I just want to say again, likewise with Judy, thanks for coming today. Hopefully this was informative and helpful for you. We're doing this series of webinars, and again, this, although probably not as content heavy as maybe some of the next couple presentations, this is probably one of the most important ones, because again, if you're not connecting with your students and they feel isolated in an online environment, they're less likely to participate. So this is kind of sets the ground for, or sets the stage for really diving into content online and learning and teaching and learning online in the next couple weeks. So, again, the more you can do this, the better. And one of the things that they know about online learning research is that isolation is the devil. And if we do our best to make sure that we mitigate any feelings of isolation during this remote time. So, again, we'll stick around here for a few more minutes and answer any questions that you have.